Hey guys, welcome back to Study Collab. Today's video is a highly anticipated one. It's how to study for English, whether that's language, literature, or both. I'll be showing you how to study in particular for the unseen papers. So personally, throughout high school, English was always a subject that I probably struggled with most. And I think it was just because I didn't know how to study for it properly, especially the unseen papers. I always thought that there was no way you could study it because you can't predict what the content of the text is going to be. However, through the IB, I sort of developed different ways. So I've come up with 4 different methods you can study for the unseen text to get yourself really prepared for them, no matter what the text is about. And I've just based them off the criteria for the IB syllabus in particular, but they're applicable to whatever English course that you're doing. So the first marking point of an unseen paper is always trying to show the examiner that you have a good understanding of the text. This will refer to things like the purpose of the text and also the context that it's in. So to get top marks in this criteria, you have to show you have a good understanding of the text and context. When it says well-chosen references, that refers to the quotes that you're choosing. So are they useful and effectively supporting your analysis? The study method that I've chosen to target this criteria is just practice papers. In my opinion, you can prepare for 75% of the paper. This first 25% of the criteria is something that you just have to get used to through practice, getting a feel for different text types and how to pick out the purpose and identifying the context it's in. What I like to do is read through past papers and I will annotate past papers. I'd either write a fully detailed plan of exactly what I'm going to write, or I'll write out the full essay. And also make sure you give it to your teacher for feedback as well, because this is the only way you're going to get better and improve on areas that you need to work on. I would recommend handwriting essays just because the actual exam is handwritten and you have to get used to writing in time pressure. But at the same time, I get that it does take a long time and a lot of effort, so I would do some handwritten, but the majority of them were typed up just so I could practice the first section. The second part of the criteria is all about stylistic devices. This part of the criteria is pretty easy to prepare for and you'll improve on it with encountering different texts. To get the top marks, you have to show you have a good understanding of the devices and why they were used in this text, in terms of what effect are they having on the reader and the overall message. The study method that I think targets this best is flashcards. So I've made a different range of flashcards according to different text types. Within each pack has different stylistic devices that are associated with it and commonly found in those texts. In my opinion, what sets apart a 4 out of 5 from a 5 out of 5 is the types of devices that you're using and drawing upon. You want to be able to show the examiner you can pick out higher order devices like anaphora or antithesis, but also things that are text type specific, because this can also help with criterion A, where you're showing you're more aware of the text type conventions of language. So just like a normal flashcard, there's the technique on the front, and then at the back there's 2 pieces of information. So at the top is a definition of the technique, and I only write this if I think I'll forget it later on in the future, but if it's like drilled into my brain, something like alliteration, then I don't need to write it down. But the second part of the flashcard is probably more important. What I write here is a common effect that device is typically used for. So for an anaphora, for example, writers will use anaphora if they're trying to engage the audience in a particular emotional response. And on the flashcard, I've written particular emotional response just to generalize it. However, when you're in the actual exam, don't write that, but be more specific. So are they trying to evoke sympathy in the audience? Are they trying to evoke guilt? Things like that. Memorizing these flashcards are more just prompts to help you analyze and annotate the text so you can increase the sophistication in your writing. I just wanted to take the time to talk a little bit about text types and why they're so important. I think that the Langlit course, well, especially the language portion, the main thing that they're trying to get you to recognize and understand is how the same message can be conveyed with 2 different text types. This is normally the case for the HL paper where you have to write a comparative essay. Typically they'll have a similar theme, but they'll be conveyed differently depending on the text type. So if you use these flashcards and have specific ones according to different text types, then you can really get a feel for why certain techniques are used in visual text or newspaper articles and how that differentiates from the other text that you're analyzing. So with this example, the first one is visual devices, and I can almost guarantee that there'll be some form of visual text either on its own or embedded within like a news article or something. So knowing your visual devices is really important. Something like manipulating the text with bold, italics, and fonts is either to draw attention, create emphasis, or contrast. So if you're running out of literary devices in terms of the language being presented, then also draw upon structural features of the text. So look at the way that they're presenting the text that aids the message they're trying to convey. Things like captions may position the reader to view the visual text in a certain way. So the language features of news articles might have facts, opinions, stats, antithesis, headlines, and bylines. So having the terminology that's specific to like newspaper articles, that's really important. Knowing the device and being able to pick it out is one thing, but also you have to have an understanding of the effect it's having on the reader. So when I'm writing, what I like to remember is every sentence has to have a purpose, otherwise you are rambling and not being concise. So for me, that means structuring each sentence like, this is the device, this is where I see it in the text, and this is why it's important to either the purpose, the audience, or the content of the text. But remember, this is a skills-based test, so you have to practice applying these techniques and being able to identify them in the text. And the best way to do this is practice annotating. When I'm doing this, I will literally pick out everything that's drawing attention to me. So things like the title, is it trying to allude to something minute as like a share button? That could be used to spread awareness. So take a past paper and set a timer for 20 minutes to pick out any device you can, read the text, get an understanding of it, and draw lines to annotate where devices have been used and what effects they're trying to convey. Even if you're not going to write it in your essay, just pick out whatever you can, because that way it can provoke thoughts in your head on what to write, different themes to write about, and really just get your brain going so you have things to write about in your essay and you're not sitting there wasting time getting writer's block. So when I'm looking at this text in particular, the first thing I'll see is it looks like a website. There's that banner at the top that has the tabs you can click on. They've used clever manipulation of images, so they're using that B to draw your eye down the page and continue reading. They've bolded the prices to donate in honeycomb, and that sort of draws your attention and creates contrast with the yellow background. They've used highly modal words in their text like I will. They're trying to convey the message that they want you to donate to this cause. So then you would write in your annotations there's a slight undertone of a persuasive appeal, and then use that to further inspire more annotation about different persuasive techniques that they're using. If you're running out of techniques that you could mention, there's tons of resources online that you can refer to. I'll try and leave the link to this one in the description if I can find it, but here it gives you all these different devices, shows you examples of where you might find them, and then also the effects on the reader. The next section of the criteria is the organization and development of your essay. So this refers to how you structure your paragraphs. Do they flow nicely? And also, are you developing each point that you're mentioning to its full extent? To get top marks in this section, you have to be coherent and organized in your essay, as well as developing each and every point. This is where planning your essay in the initial stages of the exam becomes really important, because otherwise you might be developing more points for one text versus the other, especially if it's the HL comparison essay you have to write. For me, when I'm writing my essays, I tend to write them in the exact same structure, just so I don't get confused, and also it gives me time to practice it and make sure that it's coherent and flows really well. The revision technique that I use to study for this piece of criteria is I made a revision booklet where I planned out exactly how I was going to structure my essay, and I practiced using this in my mock exams and my trial exams just to make sure it was correct and it marked well. And then once I'd gotten the structure that I wanted to use, I just continually used that throughout and studied off that method. So now I'm going to just quickly explain and break down how I wrote my essays and the plan that I used going forward in my paper 1 exam for the HL paper. So at the beginning of my essay, you have an introductory paragraph. So in that paragraph, you want to Firstly, explicitly state what each text is about, and also give a brief outline of what the similarities and differences are in both texts. So the first body paragraph that I always wrote about was about text type and structure. I would do this first for text A and then continue on for text B. In my plan, I basically had a topic sentence written in my head that I was able to adapt to whatever essay that I got. So this one says, text A can be recognized as this text type through structural and stylistic devices that the writer has chosen to incorporate. And then I would really break down exactly how they show that in the text. So if it was like a poem, where they talk about stanzaic structure, is the pattern regular, do they use caesura and jambant, what are the lengths of each stanza, that sort of thing. If it was a news article, I would talk about the headline, are there any bylines, captions, other paragraphs, how are they structured, is it simple to read and follow. Following the structure of the text type itself, I would talk about the significance of it and how it's being used to emphasize the purpose or the message and how it sort of targets the audience. So I incorporate all of those elements, but at the same time, it also mentioned the really explicit text type conventions that they're using. And then you'll see on the left-hand side, I put a few sentences just to prompt my thinking of what I'm meant to look for and write in this paragraph. For example, the first one says, there is a title included at the top of the text, centered and bolded to indicate its significance and introduce readers into the content of blank, blank, blank. And that will be relevant to whatever text it is. Those are sort of very general sentences, but when you get the text itself, you can sort of rephrase them in a way that will make it specific to the text and show your understanding of it. On the right hand side of this page, I've just sort of outlined certain things about structure you could look for and mention specific to a text type. So I have for poems about stanzas, news articles about headings, images. On a blog post, is there a visual aid? What's been signposted to the reader? Yeah, so you don't necessarily need to memorize this, but just writing it down really helps you to keep in your head what you're meant to look out for. And then when you're in the exam, it will help you jog your memory as to what you can write for the first paragraph. And then basically once I'd done that for body paragraph 1, I would just repeat that for text B if it's the comparative one. If you're in SL, you don't need to worry about that, but if you're doing the comparative essay, you would do the same thing but for text B, but make sure you're mentioning any similarities and differences in structure and text type specifically. So you could mention that text B does this differently because it's this text type. They structured it in a more simplistic way because it's trying to instruct readers, or whatever it is. Make sure you make clear that there are links between the two texts in how the author is portraying it. The second set of body paragraphs that I would talk about is audience and purpose. So audience refers to who is the writer trying to convey the message to, and try not to be really general about this and say society, because that's not really showing you understand who the target audience of the text is. Try to be really specific. Is it a certain demographic like age, gender, culture? Is it people with a certain education background? If you're not sure about the audience, try and consider the context it's in. So if it's in the 21st century, is that referring to those who use social media, the younger demographic? That can help you to prompt your thinking. With purpose, there's certain words you can look at to try and jog your thinking. So is it trying to persuade, inform, entertain, bring awareness to, convey, educate, those sorts of words that I've written there on the right hand side. When you're talking about audience, also trying to incorporate the context, as I mentioned. So is it a certain social context, historical, local, global, political, all of that. On the left hand side again are just sentences that help me prompt my thinking and what to write. So like a comparative sentence might be, the context of text A and B greatly influence the way in which they would be produced and received. Text A aims to bring readers to view the significance of yada yada yada, and then whilst text B examines the importance of this in the context of something. And then I would continue on to explain how this is actually shown in the text. My last two sets of body paragraphs would be about tone and mood. So I think tone and mood, whilst they're different things, you can sort of incorporate them together because they link really well to each other. So tone words, it's really good to write down certain tone words that come to mind that you could think of when you're trying to analyze the text. So a sentence on the left hand side I'm showing you now says, in text A, the something, this would be the evidence, or like a word or phrase, justifies the something tone that they take in writing this text. You would fill in those blanks as you're writing it, and don't take this as you have to memorize this and write exactly what it says and fill in the words to accompany the text, but take it as use these sentences to spark discussion in your head as to how you should be annotating. You're reading the text but also writing your essay. So planning is really important to make sure that you know exactly what each paragraph is going to be about, to make sure you target all of the big five and analyze the entirety of each text in a balanced way. The last part of the criteria is about language. So how well you use language, is it carefully chosen, and do you have a varied range of words you can refer to that's appropriate to what you're trying to convey? And that's how you get the top marks. You use varied language. You're not just using the same word again. You don't say, they do this to convey, they do this to convey. You're using a broad range of sophisticated words that are also carefully chosen and precise to exactly what you're trying to write. So trying to build your vocabulary is something that will take time, definitely. And the earlier you start, the better. So if you're still in the early stages of high school, really try to read more books to build your vocabulary. But if you're in your final years of high school and you're doing the IB and you figured out it's too late, it's not. There still are other ways you can build your vocabulary in a short amount of time. So the revision method that I use for this is writing up a word and sentence bank to build up the range of words you're able to draw upon when you're writing the essay that will be most appropriate. There's different subheadings under my word and sentence bank. On the first page are a bunch of effect words. This might include how to show what the writer is trying to convey in terms of purpose, audience, or message. So they might be trying to employ this, detail this, delineate, connote, typify, perpetuate, all of those effect words that you can use when trying to show the effect on the reader. There's also a bunch of those sentences that are more sophisticated and make you sound more fancy and smarter. So like one example might be, the writer crafts a salient expression as to the way in which, and then fill out the rest of that. They further elucidate the impression that, fill out the rest of the sentence. The more you write down these things, they'll come in your head in the middle of the exam and you can be like, oh, I can use this sentence to really sophisticate up your writing and add some flair to it. This word bank also includes sentences and words you can use for stylistic features. So if it's a visual text, a poem, news article, there's also a broad range of tone words, like is it sarcastic, nostalgic, optimistic, flippant, didactic, all of those. And then also ways to describe diction. Is it ambiguous, moralistic, monosyllabic? The last two sections are just other sentences and words you can use when you're writing about context, audience, and purpose. But it also has comparative words. So if you're doing the higher level comparative essay, there's words you can use that will help you to initiate that comparison between the two texts. So maybe the text draw parallels. When you're finishing a sentence, you can write, this is in contrast to text B, which is much less something, something, something. The text deviate in terms of their variant interpretations of whatever it is. I added to this in a number of ways. So if I just heard words that the teacher was saying sounded fancy, then I would write that down and just keep adding to it over the 2 years of the course. Or the more accessible way and faster way to do this is I would read exemplar essays that got very high marks in the paper one. I'd go in with a highlighter and just pick out words that sound sophisticated, and if they phrase something in a really good way that sounds concise and straight to the point, I would note that down as well. I basically used other people's essays that we were given as exemplars and got really high marks to improve my own writing. And I think that is definitely a really good technique to use, because the essays that are being written at the end of the year in their final exams, they've obviously done a lot of revision and basically are able to write in a very academic fashion that sounds not too colloquial, or they phrase things appropriately to the text. So I would just learn from them and try to adapt my own writing style to not copy them, but get inspired by them. And of course, you could look where they had strengths and weaknesses, because this was marked by an IB examiner. so you can gain some tips from their mistakes, but also gain from what they did well and what marked well. This word and sentence bank that I've created, I did over time throughout the course. I am selling it on my website, study-collab.com, so if you want to refer to that, then you can purchase it on there, but if not, you can just build your own over the course when you encounter new texts, exemplar essays, that sort of thing. But with that being said, don't be discouraged if your vocabulary isn't very broad, because mine definitely wasn't, and I had to work on it over the 2 years to make sure that it was really widespread and I was able to draw upon a number of different words that looked like I was carefully choosing them to fit the sentence. With that being said, that's everything for this video. I know it was a very long one, but hopefully it helps you out with your English revision and how to ace your exams for the unseen papers. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, don't forget to give it a like, comment down below. Make sure you subscribe to my channel for more content like this and turn on that notification bell to be notified when I post next. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!